You didn't ask, but it was there in your eyes. Every question you refused to speak out loud. I remember that moment with a sickening clarity, a dull pounding sensation in my chest, like hearing a distant door slam in an empty house. That sound still lives in me. Even now, I hear it echoing whenever I close my eyes at night. It started on a Friday evening. The memory is so vivid it glistens with the sheen of raw nerve endings. She had a stand-up gig at a small comedy club on the outskirts of downtown Seattle. The place was cramped, reeking of cheap beer and stale anxiety. Rows of mismatched chairs faced a makeshift stage lit by harsh, flickering spotlights. I'd made it just in time. After a grueling day at the logistics office, I was already on edge from too many deadlines and not enough caffeine. Still, I showed up to support her, as a husband should. The audience was scattered, maybe 20 people total. I slipped into the back row, hoping she'd notice me, hoping she'd shoot me that little grin that used to melt my stress away. Instead, she launched right into a bit about the frustrations of marriage. Fine, it was her usual comedic territory. But then her jokes took a sharp turn. She said, "It's funny what men will do if you promise them a secret, especially if you pretend it's locked behind some bedroom door." The crowd tittered. Documents, corporate secrets, phone passcodes. Trust me, there's always a pillow you can prop up to get the job done. My throat went dry. There was a forced, edgy laughter from a few men in the front row. She didn't see me come in. The light in her eyes was bright, almost feverish. Or maybe she did see me and just pretended otherwise. I couldn't be sure. She carried on about sex in threes, like it was a punchline, an anecdote she'd borrowed from a tabloid. But the way she said it, the glint in her eye, my stomach twisted. Because she sure as hell wasn't just riffing. There was too much real excitement in her voice, too much slyness in the lift of her brow. I remember a crackling hush in my ears, like static, as she painted lurid pictures with her words, pictures I never wanted to imagine. Who was she? This was the same woman who, just a few years ago, cried with me in the hospital corridor when my mother passed. The same woman who used to pray for good luck before we embarked on a weekend fishing trip. Now she was boasting about the best ways to get a man to do what you want. The audience was half laughing, half holding its breath, uncertain whether to be amused or scandalized. Then it happened, a moment of eerie stillness. Her microphone was still on, but she seemed to forget or not care. She stepped behind the curtain with a triumphant smirk, and I heard her clear as day. "Ryan told me it'd be easy. Just slip in, keep him busy with a little fling, and everything is ours." What do you think, guys? Should I mention the papers next? The crowd rustled. A few folks turned around confused. She reappeared on stage, bright smile plastered on. "Oh, sorry," she cooed into the mic. "Just a little insider talk." I swear my heart stopped. The documents. Our documents. Some official stuff from my job that had come up in conversation a few months back. She teased me about it then, half flirting, half prying. "Simon, Johnny, let me see what's in those top secret files," she'd say with a laugh. I used to think it was harmless curiosity. But there, in that dingy comedy club, her real motivation glared under the spotlight. She was mocking me, bragging about using her body to gain access to something that was mine, something important. And she was laughing at the stupidity of the man who let her do it. I felt an ache in my chest, somewhere deep, unreachable. Then came the swirling images, her flirting with me at night, the times she reached for my laptop, the playful kisses that turned into more, always timed with me lowering my guard. Every memory turned rancid in my head. I stumbled out before the set ended. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. Everything else that night passed in a blur. I remember driving aimlessly around the city, the lights blurring into one long neon streak, drifting from block to block until I found myself by the waterfront. The bitter wind whipped off Puget Sound, stinging my eyes. I leaned against the hood of my car, listening to the dull hammering of my pulse. 1,000 conflicting thoughts battered my brain. Was this real? Was she exaggerating for the sake of comedy? Or was there truth in that mocking tone? Those sly references to a third person, those jokes about corporate secrets in bed. But I knew. God help me, I knew. That was no mere comedic shtick. There was a venom to her words, a certain triumphant cruelty. She didn't just want to amuse the crowd. She wanted to humiliate me. And I sensed there was more darkness behind the curtain of laughter. I don't know how long I stood out there in the cold, wrestling with disbelief. By the time I got home, it was close to midnight. Our suburban house looked eerily calm, each window dark except for the living room lamp she'd left on. I stepped inside and heard the faint hum of her phone playing music in the bedroom. She was there, perched on the edge of the mattress in her usual oversized t-shirt, humming quietly, as though life had never been simpler. She caught my eyes and gave me a little smile that might have once thawed my worst temper. But all I felt was a dull emptiness, a sense that I was staring at a stranger's face. I wanted to confront her, to grab her by the shoulders and demand the truth. But I was afraid of what she'd admit, afraid of the poison she might spew, afraid that if I heard the words come out of her mouth, I'd lose the will to breathe. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked in a near whisper, "How do you recognize a liar?" She looked at me, blinking, confusion momentarily flickering across her features. Then a half-hearted shrug. "Tense hands," she said slowly. "Eyes that dart around. Pretty obvious, right?" Her eyes drifted away as she spoke, scanning the bedroom walls like she was already searching for an exit. And in that moment I realized she was describing herself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear out that overhead light fixture and break it across the floor. Instead, I nodded. "You'd know, wouldn't you?" It came out quieter than I intended. More broken. She shifted. A slight frown. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I muttered. "Just nothing." We slept in the same bed that night, though sleep is an overstatement. She turned her back to me. I stared at the ceiling. The darkness pressed down, thick and suffocating, as though the entire weight of the city was in my chest. The next day, I made phone calls. It happened before I fully realized why. I dialed all her closest friends. They'd been around us for years, women who once teased me for being too protective. "Sarah's lucky," they'd say. "John's such a rock." Now I was the one calling, asking them to come over for an urgent talk. They arrived, one by one, exchanging confused looks. They found me in the living room, which was bare except for a few leftover decorations from some long-ago holiday. I never had the heart to take them down. Sarah stood off to the side, arms folded protectively over her chest, lips pressed tight. She tried to crack a joke, but the tension in the room was too thick. The women glanced at her, then back at me. They sensed something was amiss. That's when I told them everything. I told them about the jokes at the club, about her microphone not being turned off, about the mentions of Ryan and the documents. I detailed the glimpses of betrayal I pieced together. Small lies she told me about late-night rehearsals, receipts for dinners I'd never attended, the way she'd been cold and distant on certain nights, then overly affectionate when she wanted to see something on my laptop. I told them how she ridiculed me in front of an audience, how she used our marriage as a stepping stone to climb higher, maybe get the inside track on something for her new business deals with that media agent. My voice broke at times, but I kept talking. I looked each of them in the eyes, letting the shame and fury drip from every syllable. Some of them covered their mouths, stunned. A couple exchanged glances, their cheeks coloring with anger or pity. But the important thing was that I told them the truth, my truth. Sarah tried to interject, once or twice. I saw the color drain from her face, the way her shoulders tensed. She spat a few sarcastic remarks, attempted to laugh it off. But nobody was laughing now. She looked from one friend to the next, realized they were hearing me, not her. For a woman who thrived on attention, that must have been a special kind of hell. Afterwards, they left, each in their own wave of disbelief or quiet condolences. Sarah and I were left in the living room, the silence crackling. I noticed her hands trembling at her sides. Her eyes shimmered with something. Anger, embarrassment, maybe regret. I couldn't be sure. I didn't care. She opened her mouth to speak, but I walked right past her and went into my office, closing the door. She pounded on the door once, twice, then fell silent. That night, I wrote her a letter. I was sitting in that small, cramped room I'd converted into a study. The desk lamp cast a harsh cone of yellow on the paper. My reflection in the window was ghostly, hollow-eyed. I wrote, scratched out sentences, wrote again. There was too much swirling in my head. Heartbreak, rage, the sickening sense of betrayal. But I wrote everything. My love for her, once unstoppable. My heartbreak, my anger at her brazen jokes, my resentment at being used. I wrote about the documents and how I realized, too late, that she and Ryan had planned it all behind my back. At some point I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was morning light creeping through the blinds, my hand cramped around the pen. I stared at the pages I produced. 5, 6, maybe more. It read like a confession, or maybe a eulogy for the marriage. My marriage. Our marriage, now a smoldering wreck of half-truths and illusions. She was in the kitchen, still wearing the same oversized t-shirt, looking out the window at our dead lawn. I walked up behind her, placed the letter on the table, and said, "I need you to hear this." My voice was low, rough with sleeplessness. She turned, eyes puffy. She looked like she might protest, but then she nodded, swallowing hard. I began to read, out loud, word for word. "You didn't ask about why I'm so quiet these nights," I started, my voice catching at the back of my throat. "You didn't ask how I felt hearing you mock me from that stage. The stage I've always supported you on, even when nobody else gave a damn. You didn't ask what I was thinking when I overheard your jokes about documents and sex, and how easy it is to control a man. You never asked, maybe because you already knew the answers." She inhaled sharply. I forced myself to look at her, to watch every twitch of her expression, the flicker of shame or fury in her dark eyes. Then I carried on, stumbling over my own bitterness. "I loved you," I read. "And I thought you loved me too. The real me, not just an opportunity. My mother's funeral. Our nights by the fire. The times we drove to the bay to watch the sunrise. Were those real for you? Or were you just marking time until the next advantage showed up? I can't stand the thought that maybe every kiss was a prelude to a question, every embrace a distraction so you could rummage through my desk afterwards." I paused, biting back a surge of emotion. Then I pressed on, voice trembling. "I don't want an apology. I don't need you to say you're sorry. I don't need excuses about how you got carried away in your comedic ambitions, or how Ryan seduced you with talk of big breaks and new connections. I'm beyond caring about that. The only thing I'm filing for is freedom. From you. From this house. From this rotting illusion we called a marriage." Her lip quivered. I heard a faint whimper escape her throat. But I kept reading. "I'm not filing for divorce because that implies we had something real to end. I'm filing for a release from the woman who stabbed me in the back and laughed about it in front of strangers. Maybe you'll never understand how deep that knife went. Maybe you don't care. But this is me telling you. I'm done. There was more, but I couldn't go on." My voice gave out. I let the pages drop to my side, staring at the floor. My heart was pounding so hard, it drowned out all other sounds. She reached for me. "John." It came out as a plea. I jerked away, a surge of hatred flaring in me, so raw it scared me. "Don't touch me." My voice was strangled. I took a step back, my entire body rigid, fists clenched. "You lied to me. You used me. You humiliated me in ways I never thought possible. And for what? Some papers, some shot at comedic fame. Maybe to impress Ryan, the guy who God, Sarah, just don't. She crumpled onto a chair. I saw tears gather at the corners of her eyes. She never was the type to cry in front of me, even during our worst arguments. Now, though, the tears came. But they felt too late, too after the fact. Something in me hardened, like a door slamming shut inside my heart. I turned and walked out, letter still clutched in my hand. Days passed in a haze of half-lit afternoons and sleepless nights. I moved to the guest room, barricading myself behind the bare walls and an old mattress. It was easier to be alone than to see her wandering the hallway, eyes red, face sullen. She tried to talk to me a few times, left half-whispered apologies at the door, explanations that I refused to acknowledge. I'd take my coffee out of the house just to avoid her in the kitchen. And she spent more time on her phone than ever, possibly texting Ryan, or maybe just scrolling through social media. Who knows? When I did see her, I noticed that the spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by something hollow, haunted. Part of me hated that I still cared, but I did. Late at night, lying awake on that creaking mattress, I'd remember the old days, our first years together, the laughter, the plans for a bright future. Then the reality of her betrayal would slam into me again, ripping those memories to shreds. One evening, I found myself driving to a bar I'd never been to before. Some dive in a sketchy corner of the city. I parked and walked in, ignoring the suspicious side eyes from the regulars. I ordered whiskey, neat, sat in silence. Time blurred. Every so often, a memory would surface. Sarah's quicksilver grin the day we bought our first couch, her head resting on my shoulder during a midnight show at some roadside comedy club. Then I'd see her on stage, mocking me, or I'd see the faint outline of Ryan in the background, smirking. I didn't even know what the bastard looked like up close, but in my mind, he was tall, stylish, brimming with smug confidence. My fists clenched involuntarily. I tried to drown those images in whiskey. Didn't work. I ended up stumbling out of the bar. No solace gained, just a heavier weight in my chest. That weekend, I found out Sarah was planning to move out. I heard her on the phone in the living room, rummaging through drawers, speaking in hushed tones. I caught the name Ryan once or twice, and my stomach lurched. She was probably setting something up, maybe a place to stay. Fine. Good. Let her go. I convinced myself this was what I wanted, to see her pack her bags, vanish from the house we'd shared. But when I heard the wheels of her suitcase dragging across the floor, the finality of it struck me like a punch. I wanted to scream at her, "Look at what you've done. Look at how you've destroyed us." I wanted to beg her, "Why didn't you talk to me before it all fell apart?" The words stuck in my throat, replaced by a burning resentment I could barely contain. She paused at the threshold. Our eyes locked. For a heartbeat, I saw the woman I once loved. Her lips parted, and I heard a faint, trembling sigh. Then she left. The door clicked shut. The emptiness settled around me like a shroud. I sank onto the couch, head in my hands, feeling the ghost of her presence in every corner of that silent room. Hours blurred into days. I was on autopilot, going to work, slogging through tasks, ignoring colleagues who asked if I was okay. I'd come home to the same quiet house, flick on the TV but never watch it, scrounge for something to eat, then lie awake in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. At some point, I discovered that the documents she'd stolen from my desk had been emailed out, possibly to Ryan, or to somebody who'd gained from them. I recognized they were important for my job, but my heartbreak overshadowed any sense of professional alarm. I'd do damage control later. Right now, all I could think about was how she used our bed to pry them out of me. How she must have planned it with Ryan. Wait until he's half asleep, cozy up, then gently push the laptop open. The memory of her lips on mine, her arms sliding over me while she typed in the background. God. It made me sick. I confronted my boss one morning, half delirious from lack of sleep. I told him we might have a security breach, that I'd do everything to fix it. I accepted the blame, the shame. I almost didn't care. I'd lost the best part of myself already. Losing my job seemed like a minor footnote in the tragedy. I guess that's when I realized my life, as I knew it, was over. Everything I'd built, my sense of identity, the safe harbor of marriage, was gone. The future was a gaping void, but somewhere in that void, a dull spark flickered. A grim kind of determination. I remembered the day my mother died, how I made a promise to never let life destroy me without a fight. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Ryan, that leech of a man, consume the rest of my days. So I started planning. Nothing dramatic at first, just small steps. I had a couple of calls with my lawyer to see how best to protect myself legally. I drafted an outline of how to approach the situation with HR at my company, how to minimize the fallout. I even wrote a short, polite letter to Ryan's PR firm, letting them know I was aware of their involvement and that I wouldn't stand by quietly. But I didn't send it yet. Something told me to wait. Then came the moment I dreaded and desired in equal measure, the confrontation with Ryan. He showed up at my house one evening, unannounced. It was dusk, the sky a bruise of purple and gray. I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window and saw him there, leaning against his flashy rental. Tall, fit, wearing a crisp shirt and jeans that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He radiated that easy confidence that always got under my skin. He stepped onto the porch, knocked. My heart thudded. I opened the door. We stared at each other, two men with an ocean of bitterness between us. He cleared his throat, looked me square in the eye. "John," he said, voice deep and calm. "I came because Sarah asked me to. She wants tow." I cut him off with a hiss. "Sarah's not here, and I don't want her mouthpiece showing up on my property." He spread his hands, an almost patronizing gesture. "I get it. You're angry. But look, man, whatever happened between you and Sarah is between you two. I'm not the villain here. We just don't." I warned, my voice tight. "Don't stand there and try to spin it." His eyes flickered, a hint of frustration creeping in. "I'm not spinning anything. Yes, I've been involved with Sarah, but if you'd heard our side. I barked a bitter laugh. "So now you're a team. Good. Great. Congratulations on that. Get the hell off my porch." He scowled. "Look, John, it's not what you think. I was helping her with a promotional angle. She's trying to expand her comedic platform, and yeah, we might have crossed some lines. But the documents..." A wave of cold rage crashed over me. "You used me," I snapped, stepping forward. My fists clenched so tightly I felt my knuckles pop. "You used my marriage as a stepping stone." She humiliated me in front of a crowd, joked about how easy it was to trick me into giving up those files. "And you, Ryan, you gave her that plan, didn't you?" He raised his voice. "Did you ever once think about what she wanted in her career? Did you support her, really, or did you just try to keep her safe in your little suburban bubble?" Something snapped in me. With a low growl, I swung at him. My right fist connected with his jaw. A dull crunch, followed by a blinding spike of pain in my knuckles. He staggered back, cursing. For a moment, I thought he'd lunge forward, that we'd brawl right there on the porch. But he just wiped his lip, checking for blood, and glared at me. "You're gonna regret that," he said, voice thick with anger. "Get out." I managed, breathing ragged. "Now." He stared a second longer, like he was measuring me up. Then he turned and walked back to his car. I stood there, adrenaline coursing through me, my lungs burning. The old me, the calmer, rational me, might have handled things differently, but that version of me was gone. He drove off, tires squealing. I sank onto the porch steps, cradling my bruised fist. My pulse hammered. A quiet satisfaction lurked under the pain. Maybe it was childish, but I took some grim solace in that single punch. It felt like I'd reclaimed a scrap of dignity they'd stolen. Time lurched forward. I began the legal process of severing ties. My lawyer explained we couldn't just file for freedom in a literal sense. There were procedures, documents, but that was all semantics. I knew what I was doing, walking away from the facade of the life I once had. The real separation was in my heart, in my mind. Every piece of paper was just an echo of that decision. Meanwhile, Sarah called me, left voicemails. I didn't respond. She texted me to say she was staying with a friend, not with Ryan. Her words. I read them and felt nothing. Then she tried a different approach, writing me a long email about how she'd only wanted to push the boundaries in her comedy, about how Ryan was a business partner who took advantage of her ambition. She insisted the betrayal wasn't planned from the start, that it just grew out of her desperation for success. I didn't even bother finishing the email. I closed my laptop, swallowing a sour taste. I was done letting her words churn up my insides. A few more weeks pulled by. There was a hearing at my job about the leaked documents. I explained the situation as best I could, bracing for the worst. To my surprise, the company offered me a chance to redeem myself, under strict oversight. Maybe they pitied me, or maybe they saw me as a loyal employee who'd made a grave error by trusting the wrong person. Either way, I was on thin ice, but at least I still had a paycheck. Most nights, I lay awake, half consumed by a bleak emptiness. But a subtle shift began to take shape in my chest, like a wound slowly scabbing over. I realized I wanted to be rid of Sarah, of everything that tied me to that awful comedic fiasco, that final humiliation. I wanted a fresh start, or at least the semblance of one. Then, one crisp fall afternoon, she reappeared without warning, stepping through the front door with a key I'd forgotten to reclaim. I was in the living room, sipping black coffee, wearing the same clothes I'd had on for 2 days. She stood there in a simple sweater and jeans, looking thinner, hollowed out by regret or shame. I braced myself for another painful exchange. She spoke my name. John, can we talk? I set my coffee down with a trembling hand. Sarah, there's nothing left to say. The papers are in motion. The damage is done. I know, she said quietly, her voice tight. I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry. Not for the comedy, not for wanting a career, but for hurting you in ways I never intended. It got out of control. Ryan, Stop. I raised a hand. I don't care what Ryan did, or didn't do. This was between us. And you threw it away. Tears rimmed her eyes. I never meant to lose you. Maybe not, I said, my voice strained. But you did. And now, I'm not sure there's anything left of me for you to hold on to. She looked around the room, at the bare walls, the boxes I'd begun to fill with items for donation. Her gaze landed on the dusty frame of our wedding photo. She exhaled shakily. I understand, she whispered. I stared at her, at the faint lines on her face, the subdued sadness in her posture. A twisted part of me wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but the rest of me screamed in protest. Don't. She's the one who destroyed you. I looked away. Take whatever you need, I said hoarsely. Then go. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She walked around slowly, gathering a few random belongings, some clothes, a few books. As she passed me, she paused. I know you won't believe me, she said, her voice trembling. But I did love you, John. In my own messed up way, I really did. I didn't respond. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Then she left, and the house felt emptier than ever. The weeks that followed were a slog of paperwork, phone calls, and emotional purgatory. I waded through the last vestiges of our joint finances, canceled old subscriptions we'd shared, contacted mutual friends to inform them that, yes, we were done. Some tried to console me. Others pretended they hadn't heard the rumors. But it was like burying a corpse, a cold necessity, performed step by step, while the heartbreak stiffened in my chest. Little by little, I transformed the house. I tore down the photos on the walls, replaced them with new frames, landscapes of places I wanted to visit once I got my life back on track. Grand Teton National Park, the old fishing piers along the Washington coast. I refinished the living room floor, painted the walls a pale gray that matched the winter sky. In that mundane labor, I found a curious sense of release. On a bitterly cold morning, I boxed up the last of Sarah's items. I found an old sweater she used to wear all the time, back when we were still happy. I remember how she smelled wearing it, a mix of vanilla lotion and faint perfume. The memory stabbed me, but I forced myself to place it in the box. Enough. I had to set all these ghosts aside, or they'd haunt me forever. At some point, I got a call from my father. He lives 2 states away, down in Oregon, in a small retirement community. "Son," he said gently, "I heard about what happened. You doing okay?" I laughed bitterly. "As well as can be expected, I guess. You know, your mother always said you were the strongest of us. Even as a kid, you never let the world knock you down for too long." I swallowed hard. Memories of my mother's final days washed over me. "Thanks, Dad. You can come visit any time. Maybe a change of scenery might help." I closed my eyes, a wave of longing crashing over me. "I might just do that," I said softly. And so I did. I took 2 weeks off work, drove south to the small coastal town where my father lived. The Pacific air was cold and briny, the sky a tapestry of shifting clouds. Walking along the beach at twilight, I felt a quiet acceptance settling in my bones. Maybe I wasn't fully healed. I still woke up sometimes in a cold sweat, nightmares of Sarah's laughter echoing in my head. But I was moving forward, one painful step at a time. During one of those beachside walks, I realized something crucial. Time doesn't heal. It just wears things down, erodes them like the constant lapping of the tide against a weathered shore. My anger still flared if I let myself dwell on it, but it was duller now, a memory of a wound rather than a fresh slash. The emptiness inside me was broad and silent, but a part of me understood. That emptiness was space to fill with something new. Eventually, the old me was gone, replaced by someone older, harder, less naive. Maybe that was okay. By the time I returned to Seattle, the final bits of paperwork were ready. I signed them. So did she. According to the letter of the law, it was a divorce. But in my heart, it was a release, just like I'd promised in that letter. A release from her betrayal, her laughter at my expense, a release from the illusions I once clung to. We met one last time, briefly, in a chilly office corridor to hand over the final forms. She wore a beige coat, hair pulled back. She glanced up at me, her eyes glimmering with regret. Neither of us spoke. We exchanged the documents, lingered for a moment. Then I turned and walked away without a word. Outside, a cold wind whipped my face. I stuffed my hands in my pockets and made my way down the street, each step feeling lighter, more certain. As I rounded the corner, I felt the door inside me, the one that slammed shut the night I found out about her betrayal, click one more time. But this time, it felt like closure, like I was locking away a ruinous part of my past so I could finally move on. In the days that followed, I began to find a strange calm. People at work commented that I seemed more focused, more direct. My father said I sounded like myself again on the phone. I guess we can survive almost anything, given enough time and determination. Maybe that was the final lesson of all this. A few weeks later, I was sorting through old drawers, clearing out clutter. I stumbled upon a stack of letters from Sarah. Most were from years ago, notes she'd left me during our early days of marriage, scribbled with hearts and smiley faces. At the very bottom was the letter I wrote her, the one I read in the kitchen. I must have mixed it up in the shuffle. I ran my fingers over the words, each stroke of ink an echo of that night. I read it again, slowly. My voice in my mind sounded calmer now, older, more detached. When I reached the end, I felt a flicker of something akin to acceptance, or maybe resignation. I carefully folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and dropped it into the trash. It had served its purpose. I felt no need to keep it. That's the moment I understood the truth. Time hadn't healed me. It just wore away the edges of the wound, bit by bit. The hurt was still there, but smoothed out, less jagged. It might remain in me forever, a scar, a memory of the life I almost had. But I could live with that. Sometimes a scar is a reminder of what you survived. I stepped outside, gazing at the slate-gray sky. The air smelled of rain. In the distance, I heard the low rumble of thunder. I stood there, breathing, letting the wind brush against my face, and I felt free. Not in some triumphant, glorious way, just free, as in no longer shackled to a past that kept me prisoner. I realized I had the rest of my days, however many I was granted, to shape something new out of the shards that remained. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe I'd wake up tomorrow with the taste of bitterness still on my tongue. But for tonight, for this moment, I was content just to stand there and be. That dull pounding from before was gone, replaced by a steady, quieter rhythm. My own heart, beating on despite everything. And that was enough.